I'm joined today by Margaret Hampson from Trinity College Dublin. Welcome, Margaret. It's very nice to see you.
You too.
So, as many of you who've been following the AKC series will know, Margaret gave a great lecture on Plato's Republic, talking about the soul, the way Plato describes the human soul in the Republic, and also looking at the character of the tyrant, this particular kind of type of soul and a type of person that's kind of unbalanced and, as you said, Margaret, unable to make friends and kind of like a narcissistic kind of character. So I just thought I'd start by asking you about this Platonic concept of the soul. I suppose that idea has fallen out of fashion a bit nowadays. We don't tend to talk about our souls perhaps as much as people used to do. And what is the soul for Plato? Is it a metaphysical reality, or is it just a way of describing different aspects of a person? Can you just tell us a bit about what does this concept of the soul really mean for Plato?
Sure. I should say, beginning with the disclaimer, as always, that I'm not sure if I'm the authority here, but I think for Plato, it is a metaphysical reality. That the soul is something that continues to that is separate from the body, that continues in Plato's view to exist. After we've died, the soul will continue to exist. It's incorporeal, so it has these various features, but it's still. So you asked, is it a way of describing certain sorts of, experiences or the seat, and it can be that as well. So I think it's not merely that for Plato, but maybe the way that it's still, if we find it perhaps difficult or uncomfortable to think about this thing that exists separately and that kind of continues to exist, I think there's still a way that we can still usefully talk about the soul and take Plato's insights, even if we don't want to commit to this kind of separate metaphysical status that it has for him.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you talked in your lecture about how Plato sort of says that the soul is made of three parts, that there's the rational part of the soul and appetites, sort of sensual desires, and those two parts seem quite obvious in a way what we mean by that. But then there's this third part that's called thumos, or spirit, and that aspect of the soul is, I think, a little bit harder to grasp. At least I find that a bit trickier to just perhaps translate that into a modern day way of thinking about the human mind.
Yeah, though I think there's also a way in which what he's picking out with that is something very human. I mean, so there are debates in the scholarship about how precisely we should surprise, how precisely we should understand the nature of thumos, but it seems in particular to be related to our social nature, perhaps. So it's the seat for, as I explained, of emotions like anger, of phenomena like a desire for revenge, notions of kind of honor, what's fine, what's shameful, seem to be associated with thumos, and all of those seem to have a kind of social.
Yeah. Do you think it's a bit like what we might call the ego? When you say, someone's got, if your ego is offended by something, or if someone's got quite a strong ego, it's that sense of yourself in the world and how you appear and how you're judged. And do you think that's?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, perhaps that they're not identical, but that notion, exactly what you described, I think would be captured by one's thumos. So although it's it has this kind of tricky place in Plato's psychology. So you said that it doesn't seem to, we can kind of quite easily grasp kind of reason and appetite. And I think he recognizes that this feature of the soul does have kind of elements of both. So it's not rational, and so in that sense is like appetite, but it can also listen to reason, and that seems to be the case with these kinds of desire. If you think about, you know, anger or desires for revenge, on the one hand, these don't necessarily seem to be kind of strictly rational.
Yes.
But they're also not the same as, you know, kind of
just feeling hungry or something like that. It's yes.
So I think Plato recognizes that kind of difficulty of placing thumos, but I think there's also something that he's really captured, that there is this kind of element of ourselves that doesn't kind of reduce to appetite, but also can't be kind of identified with our rational nature as well.
No, I agree, that does make sense. And so Plato argues that a healthy, flourishing soul is one where those three different parts are in harmony with each other and they work well together, and there's a kind of order between them, and he thinks that reason should be in charge, and that those other two aspects, thumos and the appetite, should be following the lead of reason. And so do you think that Plato's sense of this flourishing soul is similar to a modern idea of mental health? Do you think it's perhaps, putting aside those metaphysical questions about what the soul is and its immortality, do you think this is a helpful way for us now to think about mental health
as a kind of balance between these
these three different elements of,
I think I would say that I should watch the rest of the lectures and see what kind of people working in kind of contemporary questions of this would say. But I think that there surely is some insight there, that we well, as the lecture series shows, that there are many perspectives on the, you know, on what mental health is. But I take it that we do think that there is something that's perhaps we might capture by saying there's something that's off balance. Say when we're suffering from mental ill health, that perhaps in some cases we don't feel that our what we might kind of capture in Plato's term by our appetites are fully in line with what we desire rationally. So perhaps a case like addiction, you might say that you're what you want to do, what you think you ought to do, is in conflict with a different kind of desire, and perhaps for other kinds of you know, forms of anxiety that we feel are kind of in conflict with either what we want to do or how we see ourselves. So I mean, I think in those very kind of broad terms, the surely is something that he's identified there, where something is kind of out of balance, or we feel that kind of one aspect of ourselves maybe has come to dominate in a way that
so the last AKC conversation I did was with John Marsden, who's from the Institute of Psychiatry at King's, and he gave a lecture about addiction. And so it's one of the really interesting things about the series is seeing the connections between different lectures. Obviously your lecture was taking such a different perspective and thinking about an ancient Greek philosopher, whereas John Marsden runs a clinic for cocaine addicts in South London. But actually, I think that sense of desire, people's desires not being, that their sort of appetites not being in line with their more rational desires, really actually fits really well. And the suffering that causes, the suffering of being in that state of psychic conflict, was something that was really brought out by John's lecture.
I mean, having said, in mine, I was suggesting that we shouldn't think of the tyrant kind of primarily as a kind of an addict figure, but I think there are still features of that account that you can see why people have read him in that way, because this picture that you have of someone who's come to be so dominated by what looks like kind of bodily appetites, a desire for pleasure, and these kind of desires that such that they grow and they come to dominate everything and kind of impose a certain sort of tunnel vision, but are also insatiable. I mean, that definitely seems to fit the bill quite well. I wanted to kind of draw attention to whether I don't think that's the whole story.
No, I agree. I mean, what was really great about the way about your lecture was that it drew more attention to our ability to form relationships with other people and to form friendships. And so I think you really showed how important that is to mental health. You know, that we can't really imagine, it's difficult to imagine perhaps a happy, flourishing human life that doesn't involve friendship, or at least the ability to kind of cooperate with other people and treat other people well and have enjoyable and fulfilling relationships. So that was I think very, very persuasive in your lecture, just to see it in that way. And I wanted to ask you a slightly broader question about philosophy. We're both philosophers, and the title of the series, Life of the Mind, has this double meaning. On the one hand, it's about mental health, but we also use that phrase, the life of the mind, to talk about an intellectual life or a contemplative life, what we might see as a more philosophical life. I gave a lecture on Spinoza and talked about his vision of a philosophical life as the one that was most happy and flourishing. And Plato has a similar kind of view, I think, but you know, both Spinoza and Plato, of course, they're philosophers themselves, and I think they do both see that as really the highest kind of life. And sorry?
Speaking from experience, speaking to your audience, you know, the best life is the philosophical life.
But I wonder if you think that philosophy is good for the soul. I mean, I suppose I'm thinking of the fact that actually there are quite a few famous philosophers who aren't exactly paragons of mental health. I mean, thinking about someone like Nietzsche, or who famously descended into madness, or you know, Kierkegaard, who wrote so much about anxiety, or Wittgenstein, who found it very difficult to form, you know, relationships, and we could go on, you know. So I just wonder what you think about this, or are there certain kinds of philosophy that are? Do you have to do philosophy in a certain way for it to be conducive to mental health, or is it just about, you know, your character type and temperament? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, really, really interesting question. I mean, you know, from experience, and maybe you too, philosophy can definitely be a source of anxiety. And but I guess, I mean, this is a question that so Aristotle is my guy, and actually I think like this question is one that's at the heart of his ethics. So I kind of think through these ancient lenses. But so it kind of comes back to the question, I guess, of our nature as well. So it seems that, you know, doing philosophy realizes a part of our nature, that we're the kinds of beings who, with a rational soul, with this capacity to, you know, to think about things, to understand, to think about the way that we think as well. And in that sense, I mean, the ancients definitely think, and I think there's something true in this too, that there is a way in which we kind of realize a part of our nature by doing philosophy, and that's a good thing. But as you said, I mean, we have a whole host of philosophers who seem to not to be kind of paragons of and I guess there's a way, maybe we have to kind of recognize that we're also, as well as, you know, rational beings, we're also social beings, and we also have appetites, and so we can't, you know, doing philosophy to the expense of everything else isn't human. And maybe that's, you know, say I don't know, someone like Wittgenstein, who with this image of just kind of very kind of tunnel vision on
Yeah, and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, I think, were the same as well. I mean, they were pretty, I mean, focused would be a kind of mild way of putting it. They were pretty focused on their philosophical thinking and writing, really to the exclusion, I think, of
yeah.
else. Yeah.
And so, I mean, in Aristotle's Ethics, there's this kind of famous tension: what's the best life? And there's, and again, you know, surprise, surprise, a lot of debate in the scholarship about, you know, what his position is. But he seems to, it's unclear whether it's he thinks that, you know, there are some things that he says which suggest that a philosophical life is the best life, and kind of realizes the best part of us, our rational part. But also, you know, he spent 9 books talking about virtue and our kind of we're also embodied beings with a non-rational part who are social, and there seems to be a kind of a problem with thinking that, you know, we could just do philosophy, kind of disengage from everything else. And I think that's Plato's point in the Republic as well. The philosopher kings and queens, they, you know, you ascend from the cave, you do your philosophy, but you have to return to the city.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that's a kind of a recognition that we're not wholly rational beings, completely divorced from other people. Yeah. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying it's good for the soul, but pursued, you know, when pursued in the right way and in recognition that we also have these other aspects to ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think Spinoza's the same, actually. It's one of the things I really like about him, is that he sees the relationships between human beings as so important, and in fact he wouldn't really think it makes sense to abstract an individual from the network of relationships that they're involved in. And so he has a really robust philosophy of friendship and ethical life, and so that's really built into his vision of what it is to be a philosopher. And I think Plato and Aristotle are the same, as you say. I mean, I know you talked a lot about the importance of friendship in Plato's view in the Republic, and Aristotle, we know, quite famously talks about friendship, doesn't he, in his Nicomachean Ethics, and does see it as an essential element of the happy life. So yeah, maybe we're drawn to philosophers at the less antisocial end of the spectrum, the philosophical spectrum. And yeah,
I think it you can see, I don't know, this is speculation, but in some forms of philosophy, you really feel that people have kind of lost touch with, you know, the world around them, and you can have there are some philosophical positions that you know, you read about and you think, was this written by a human? And maybe that's also what can kind of come from, you know, sitting in an office in an armchair all day and losing kind of touch with the phenomena that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, Margaret, thank you so much. It's been really, really enjoyable to talk to you, and thanks again for your great AKC lecture. It was, a real highlight of the series. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.